Hi everyone. We'll just wait just a minute or two for a few extra people and then we'll get underway. All right, that'll do it. Well, welcome everyone officially, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on what is SDA. I'm Richard Socrates and I'm from BlueCHP Limited. We're co-presenting today with Scope, so many thanks to the Scope team for their participation today, as well as for plenty of the content. This is a two-part series. Today is what is SDA, and we'll focus on eligibility and the application process in part 2, which will be held in 2 weeks' time on the 29th of March. That will be specifically from a support coordinator perspective to help guide you through the process. Today's webinar will run for about 45 minutes. We'll have time for a Q&A there or after, but we'll definitely have you out within an hour. A lot to get through, so let's get into just some of the run sheet or housekeeping for today, just how to navigate around the screen. You'll see there's a little chat function. So use the chat function. So the two little bubbles, the speech bubbles up there, click on that if you can't see it, and that will open up that white section there on your right. Please ask your questions as we go along. We'll try to get to them as we go. But as I said, we will have a dedicated Q&A immediately following the presentation. If we don't get to your question for some reason, please email us and we'll come back to you. We'll definitely come back to you. Finally, we'll be sending the recording of the session today to everyone who has registered, along with any of the resources that we refer to in the presentation. Feel free to give yourselves a shout out, introduce yourselves. That's always fun. So there is a section there called handouts in that white section near the chat function. If we do talk about resources, we'll drop them in there and you can download them. Otherwise, as I said, we'll send them out in the via email for anyone that's registered. All right, just before we get underway, I just wanted to share a little on Scope, so our co-presenters today, and also our initiative or brand Guide You Home, BlueCHP's Guide You Home. So I'll just start with Scope. I mean, you can see things there, but Scope is well known in Victoria for their range of disability services. And following their recent acquisition of Disability Service Australia, DSA, a large New South Wales disability service provider, put Scope in a strong position to continue to deliver quality services in both Vic and New South Wales. They also have great people while we're partnering with them today. If you are interested in knowing more, please go to their website, scopeaust.org.au, or get in contact with me and I'll be happy to direct you to whatever department you require. Guide You Home. So as I said, it's a brand by BlueCHP Limited. BlueCHP is a not-for-profit Tier 1 community housing provider and a registered SDA provider. We currently own over 800 properties in social, affordable and SDA housing. Guide You Home is our SDA brand and a 7-step process to help guide clients from their initial inquiry or that first chat right through to moving into their own home. What makes us different is we start with the client first. We don't build the house and then look for clients. We start with the client. Our preference is to build a bespoke home that doesn't just meet the NDIS building type and design category, but incorporates the client's choice and control. They get choice as to where they want to live. They choose the location, the street. If we can buy a property there, we will. They contribute and sign off to the design of the home, and they also incorporate their own interests, personal touch, just like anyone would when you're choosing a home and where you want to move into. If you'd like to know more or have any general questions on SDA for your clients, we're here to help, so get in contact. Here are our team of SDA housing specialists. There's Sue, Michelle, Fiona, and there's the regions, and I'll get you the contact details shortly. All right, so moving into who's presenting today. So from Scope, we have Hayley Maxwell. And from our business, Guide You Home, we have Sue Aspinall. Look, there's no such thing as, I don't think there's any such thing as experts in the NDIS, but when it comes to SDA, I think these two are probably closest thing to an expert. So thanks guys for being part of today, and I'm going to now hand over to Sue to get us started. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, look, as Richard said, Guide You Home is a brand or a project within BlueCHP that is specifically about SDA homes. We are a housing provider, so what I'm going to talk about is the actual bricks and mortar, the actual homes we build and part of the process along the way. Hayley will more focus on the SDA process from a support coordinator and participant point of view. The two key phrases you hear when people are wondering about SDA is extreme functional impairment or very high support needs. And I'm going to go into those in a lot more detail further on, but there's a wide variety of participants who will be eligible. Overall, it's about 6 to 7% of all NDIS participants who will be eligible for SDA. So it is a relatively small number, but for those people, it's about providing a home that can really help them to meet their goals and to provide a better home overall. It's also designed to try and reduce some of the costs of person-to-person supports as well, and perhaps, I suppose, run some more efficiencies. SDA is always designed to be a long-term home. I'll talk about STA and MTA in a moment, but SDA is a long-term home. And as Richard said, we aim, or part of our process is to find participants first and work with them and their support network to build a home that suits them, and hopefully they are going to want to live there long-term. The funding comes up in the participants plan. I'll talk about exactly what that looks like. And the other point to note is that it's for 18 to 65-year-olds. Anecdotally, I've certainly heard stories of applications going in for people in the sort of 16 to 18-year bracket. I wouldn't sort of recommend it or think you'd have a very good chance, but in certain, I was going to say extreme, but certain situations where people are really needing a better home and have nowhere else to live effectively, then I have seen that done. After 65 years of age, it's expected that people will then be using the aged care system. So look, obviously we're doing this today as an introductory, so we're starting with the basics. One thing that comes up frequently is people not completely understanding the difference between SDA and SIL, and thinking that if you have SIL funding, then you can live in an SDA home and vice versa. SDA really is very separate from SIL, from ILO, for anything else to do with people's supports that are for their activities of daily living. And that's really important. So the diagram there obviously trying to say there's an intersect with them, but SDA is really about people's need to have a home that is specialised to suit their needs, and then their care is worked out. It has to be worked out in combination, but they are separate line items, if you like. The other forms of housing that you'll hear about in the NDIS world are short-term accommodation and medium-term. I'll just go through these really briefly. Short-term accommodation also used to be called respite care. It's for up to 28 days, and usually it's taken in a block of up to 14 days. So look, being respite, it's often to give family members a bit of a break, some respite. Sometimes it's for the person to have a bit of a break and go away to a different environment, perhaps can be viewed as like a holiday situation for the participant. In STA, the accommodations provided, the care provided, the food provided, so it is all encompassing. And as I said, it's for up to 28 days per annum. MTA is funded quite differently. It is just about accommodation, and it can be up to 90 days. It's really designed for when people have applied, when they've been approved for SDA and they're waiting for things like home modifications to be finished off, or they're getting ready to move into a new SDA home, but it's not quite ready yet. So it's there to be a sort of interim accommodation in the process. And home modifications, obviously that's part of housing as well, and that's fairly self-explanatory what that is. So what is an SDA provider? So as we said, BlueCHP, we are a tier 1 community housing provider, and we are a registered SDA provider. So it's the person that owns the actual home. So it can be a not-for-profit like us, it can be a for-profit company, and there's nothing wrong with that. The NDIA has set this whole SDA scheme up to stimulate the private sector to participate in building homes for SDA participants. There's plenty of community housing providers who are looking into this space, plus there's private individuals. So that individual, it may be the participant themselves. Often we get inquiries from families. So it might be parents who say, you know, I've got an adult child who's of a certain age. We want to get them into their own home and know that they've got a sort of safe and sustainable long-term home. And look, there's nothing to stop individuals or families from doing that. There is some red tape, no surprise there. There are some hoops that you have to jump through, but it absolutely can be done if they want to go down that path. To be an SDA provider and to be able to receive the SDA funding for the participant that you're housing, you have to be registered, and that's through the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. So it's not just a case of build the SDA house and you can receive the money. You have to be registered as a SDA provider, and then after the home is built, it has to be enrolled with the NDIA in the appropriate design category, which again we'll touch on in a moment. But they're two really key things that people need to understand. They need to make sure right from the outset when they're planning the build of an SDA home that it is compliant and it meets all the needs so it can be enrolled. The last thing you want to do is go out and build a home or a couple of townhouses expecting them to be enrolled and then find that you haven't followed the guidelines appropriately and you can't get that property enrolled as an SDA property. So effectively, the SDA provider is the landlord for that home moving forward. The SDA payments, it's really important, they come directly from the NDIA to the SDA provider, and that's usually invoiced and paid monthly. So that's that. The SDA payment is quite separate. It's allocated to the person, so the person has SDA approved, but then we literally invoice the NDIA and that payment comes directly to us on a monthly basis. What the participant has to pay is what's called a reasonable rent contribution. And I think most people would be familiar with that phrase. Essentially, it's 25% of their disability support pension or an equivalent amount if they're not currently receiving the DSP. 100% of the Commonwealth rental assistance is also payable, and for most people renting that, they will be eligible for that. And that is paid in fortnightly instalments, just like most other rental payments are. And all of that is set up in the accommodation agreement, also known as the lease agreement, with the individual participant. So much like they would if they were renting privately, they have an accommodation agreement, and those rental contributions are laid out very clearly in that agreement. So that's the two sides to it, the SDA and the reasonable rent contribution. And I'll just say briefly there, we always aim to fund these properties in such a way that that the property is covered by the SDA payments and the reasonable rent contribution. But I will say in some situations, particularly where land values are high, or perhaps where a person wants more included in their home, like they want a spare bedroom or they want to put a pool in, or they just need something else that is not covered through SDA, they can then make either a capital contribution or ongoing additional payments. So like I said, it's not our aim to do that, but in some situations it is necessary, and in some situations people want to add more features to the home, and that absolutely can be done as well. So there's 4 main categories that we talk about in SDA, and I'm going to go into these in greater detail in just a moment. So improved livability, robust, fully accessible, and high physical support. So they're the design categories. Basic is essentially for properties that are existing now that people are living within. They're also called legacy stock. Some of those do have good accessibility. Some of them are sort of borderline, and that while they may be livable, they're not ideal for somebody's needs. when we talk about all of these categories and the design needs, it's really important to, when you've got time, to go through this manual here called the SDA Design Standards. It's actually a really good manual that's very user-friendly. It's set out with a lot of tables, photographs, diagrams, and uses these four icons here to determine which category they're talking about. So I'd really encourage you to have a flick through this online. You can easily find it. Again, we'll put it in the resources section, but you can find this online on the NDIS website, and it's a really good manual to help understand what is actually mandatory. So these design standards are the minimum that you must include in the designs for each of these categories. So I'd definitely say have a look through that that document. Okay, so just to explain these categories in more detail. Improved livability, we tend to talk about as the first category. So it definitely does have some features above what we would call a standard build out in the property world, but they're subtle. So typically we talk about things like improved visibility, open plan areas. Often it's for people with a sensory need, so let's say impaired vision or impaired hearing. So having extra lines of sight, having lights that can come on when somebody walks down a hallway, having light-based doorbells, extra alarms, and for people who've got impaired hearing, there's a lot of the augmentation devices that can be included as well. So obviously, to give an example, I love sort of anecdotal examples to make things more understandable. But yes, typically vision impaired, hearing impaired people. Sometimes it's people who have really heightened sensory disabilities. So it may be that extra light or extra noise can be really harmful for them. It can be very disruptive for them. So there's a lot of things we can do to actually improve the sensory surroundings that they're in. Sometimes it's for people who have an intellectual disability, and while they don't have a physical disability, they may still need a lot of monitoring and supervision, and in a setting where it's easier for them to be cared for. Robust design. Now, this is an interesting category. I'd say there's a great need out in the community for robust designed properties. We get a lot of inquiries about this. It's also a category of housing that quite a number of SDA providers don't want to go into this space. It's for reasons of usually the extra cost to build, not a huge profit margin for some people, but also they're worried about the ongoing maintenance and repairs. So robust, as the name suggests, we build really strong, sturdy homes. It's not your standard gyprock plasterboard on the walls. It's very high impact. It's much harder to punch a hole in these walls. Instead of standard glass, it might be reinforced glass or even double glazed or all different materials to make that stronger and more secure. Security screens as well. In those homes, we try and also consider, again, noise or external stimuli that can impact on a person's behaviour. So sometimes it's about the extra soundproofing in the walls that can make it quieter inside, but also for the participant who can be quite noisy. It's also trying to be respectful of the neighbours and try and keep the disruption of the neighbourhood down as well. In some robust homes, there's an extra sensory room, sometimes called a breakout room, and that's designed to be a separate space where somebody can go. Now, it might be a planned space where they go to do something that's relaxing, some type of hobby. It may be keeping a TV out of the main living area and having a separate space for something like that. It's designed, it's not meant to be some sort of a room they go to be contained in. That is not the purpose of these rooms. It's meant to be an extra space away from the main living area of the home. The other thing too to consider is lockable areas in areas like a kitchen and laundry. Now, the big asterisk is there to remind us that we're in no way advocating that we should be locking up sections of homes or cupboards from people, but many people who do qualify for the robust design category, they will have what's known as a positive behaviour support program, and within that they may have provision for some restrictive practices, seclusion and containment. I'm not the expert in that field, so I won't go into it in too much detail, except to say a kitchen is a really good example that often comes up in discussions. So obviously within a kitchen, there's sharp objects, there's heavy objects like saucepans that could be used as a weapon, there's heating appliances, etc. So for some participants, they have within their plan the ability to restrict their access to those areas for their own safety, for the safety of their carers and visitors. So we're just, again, because we work with the participant and their support network from the beginning, we can design a home specific to those needs. But we're not suggesting lockable areas unless it is very clearly identified in their plan. Lockable cupboards for medication is also another really good point, and a very important one in terms of their safety. Okay, fully accessible and high physical. Now, these two categories, I've deliberately put them together on the same page because there is an obvious crossover here, but of course there is a difference as well. So it's safe to say fully accessible is all about wheelchair accessibility. If you like fully accessible, you can think of it as the first stage. So yes, it has to be fully accessible for a wheelchair, so wider hallways, larger turning circles, kitchens and bathrooms that allow people to use those functional spaces in a wheelchair. But it's also often in the fully accessible categories, they're people who may be able to stand with assistance. So they may be able to use some sort of a wheelie walker at times. So it's not just wheelchairs. Maybe people who, when they're spending longer times in the kitchen, need to sit down while they're preparing food. So another example would be people who can transfer themselves. So again, of a condition would be people who are paraplegic. So they may still have really good upper body strength. They may have the ability to transfer from wheelchair to chair or to bed or in the bathroom to some sort of shower chair. So generally they may need some lifting devices and some support, but a lot of people can do a lot of that themselves as well. And definitely some assistive technology and automation can be really helpful within those homes. And again, if you go back to that SDA design standard, it will go into more detail about what's required. High physical support is, if you like, everything that's included in fully accessible, plus it's the next step up. So it's things like ceiling hoists. So for people who really can't help with the transfer, do any part of the transfer, ceiling hoists are now used a lot more widely. It's safer for the participant, safer for the staff who are doing a lot of that manual handling as well. Other key things in high physical support is usually more assistive technology is required and again is made available and is mandatory under those design standards. But assistive tech is also something that is very much looked at on an individual basis. So it's not like we automate the entire home for that person because we don't know what they need, what they want automated, and also what they don't want automated. So it really is individual. One thing that is mandated through the standards is the emergency power, or it's called UPS in building terms, the uninterrupted power supply. So essentially it means if the power goes off, you've got a minimum of 2 hours backup power supply. So you may have some people who are on a respirator, people needing to charge wheelchairs, all sorts of devices, electric beds and all that sort of thing. Even just, raising and lowering a bed requires electricity, and without power that can be really difficult. So high physical support homes have to have that option there as well. And just to give just a few more, I suppose, design features here just really quickly, and I've got a quick video that I'll show you in a moment as well, but you can see here in a kitchen that you could use this oven both sitting or standing. That's a little bit more of the kitchen there. People using the sink can still wheel in, have their legs underneath the sink and operate the sink effectively themselves. Similarly, in a bathroom, there's no point having cabinetry there where your legs could go. You can't brush your teeth if you can't reach the basin. It just doesn't work. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration. These are a few more photos and just thinking about a few different rooms in the house. This is actually from a project that I'll show you on the video. So this is a high physical support apartment, and you can see that the tracks are built in there in the ceiling for the hoist to be used. And it can then help to get that person from that bed into this adjoining ensuite bathroom. And again, you can see the ceiling tracks there that work across the bathroom. In terms of SDA building types, so we've talked about the 4 design standards that are based on the person's needs. There's 4 building types. Now, apartments, we all know what an apartment is. People across 3 of the categories can use an apartment. The obvious omission there is the robust design category. And look, this is probably for a number of reasons. If you were to have some robust participants can create a lot of noise, and when you're in a situation of apartments and people living relatively close together, that can be problematic. It happens anyway, but it's one attempt to sort of minimise that. We also find with participants in the robust category, often they really want some outdoor space. The family or the carers say it's really good for them to be able to get out of the house, into the backyard, even if it's just a small courtyard style backyard, but to be able to have a bit more outdoor space. There's also a safety risk there. So if participants are in upper levels of an apartment building and you've got balconies, it can be a safety risk for a lot of participants. So people who have the robust design category approved will not be approved for an apartment. The rest of the other 3 categories, villa, duplex, townhouse. Now, there's not a lot of, when I think of a townhouse, it's usually a 2-level townhouse. There's not a lot of townhouses built in SDA, to be really honest, but you certainly can build a 2-level townhouse in the improved livability category, and you can do it for robust, but I can honestly say not many people do. Most people prefer to keep it on ground level. So a villa is essentially, if you imagine an apartment on ground and its own little mini house. A duplex typically is where you've got one adjoining wall between the 2 properties. So there's, depending on what you read in different building codes, those definitions may change, but that's the easiest way to think of it. They're not a full house, they're a smaller size, but can be just as functional. House in the SDA world is for 2 to 3 SDA residents, plus the provision for on-site overnight accommodation. And then when you've got a home that's for 4 to 5 residents plus an OOA, that's referred to as a group home situation. These are just some examples of some homes that we've got currently under construction. So this one here is a duplex, obviously. So you can see that there are 2 separate entrances. So this one here coming in to, sorry, I'll go to the top one first, that might be easier. It's got a car parking space out the front here, entry into the home through here, and then you've got a bedroom here, bathroom, participant's bedroom here, a separate toilet, laundry, living area. Doesn't look all that much different to a regular home, but there will be, this is built to improve livability standard. Interestingly, in this design, where this is being built in New South Wales, we've got a situation where we've got a participant and a non-SDA family member. So that could be a parent, a sibling, it doesn't really matter what relationship they are, but it's a situation where somebody wants to live with the other person. And it was probably about 18 months, 2 years ago now, the NDIA did relax and change a lot of the rules to make that much easier to happen. The OOA office in this situation is built into this home here, but you can have a shared OOA between 2. The second side of the duplex here, it's pretty self-explanatory, but this is a room, this is built to robust standard, and this is the breakout room here. So again, it's the room that can be used as a sensory space, as a second living area, as a quiet zone away from the main living area of the house. This is another home that we are working on, and Scope are also involved with this home as well. It's important to note that the number of places is different to the number of bedrooms in a home. So for that reason I just said, if you're building an extra room for a breakout space or for an OOA or for a family member. That is not a space in the home in SDA's term. So this house will be enrolled as a 3-bedroom home. So one participant bedroom there, another one here, another one here. This one will not be designed as a participant bedroom, and so it will be enrolled as a 3-bedroom home. So it's a really important point to note there as well. Okay, so when a participant applies for their funding, you can get notification in a number of different ways after it's been approved. Sometimes it's been a phone call, sometimes it's an email, occasionally it's been a hard copy letter that I've seen, but eventually it will be shown in the participant's plan. So this is it. We've just taken an excerpt here. It's from a participant that we're working with here in Queensland. It comes under the capital support section of their plan under home modifications. Even though it's not home modification, this is where you will find it. So this participant must have applied to have some home mods done, and they've got a stated amount there. But separately under that same heading, you will find that SDA up to this figure of $49,758 per year has been approved. I am eligible as follows. The design category is robust. The building type is a villa duplex townhouse for 1 resident, and location is Queensland, Brisbane North. So that is, if you like, a maximum amount there. And it says very clearly, I can access alternative SDA categories and locations within the specified amount. So it doesn't mean they have to live in that, but they have to live within this budget. And that's really important. We get a lot of people who contact us who'll say, great, I've got SDA approved and I want you to build me a 2-bedroom house. And as much as we'd love to be able to say yes to those situations, we really can't, because the funding, we have to work within those means. I won't go on anymore about funding, but suffice to say this, it's really important that you can access another design type or a different location, but unless you've got to work within those means, it's really hard to go above that. And yeah, if people aren't happy with this outcome, then there is a process of appeals, but I won't go into that right now. So as I said, you've got the building type, the design category, whether or not that person is approved for on-site overnight assistance. A location factor is basically being designed so that it tries to weigh up the differences in pricing in different locations all across Australia. So you can imagine that buying a block of land in Sydney is far more expensive than buying a block of land in rural Tasmania. And they try to allow for those differences by using these location factors. Fire sprinklers are basically a necessity in fully accessible and high physical support homes, and so that will also be factored into the participant's plan. Now, this table is a really important one to have a look at. It's taken out of the pricing arrangements for SDA. Now, this, you may have also heard this referred to as the price guide. It was called that for many years, but this is the new name, pricing arrangements for 2021-22. And again, we'll have this available. I just want to focus on this one table, Appendix B, out of the whole price guide. Because this is something that you will look at quite a bit from time to time. So let's say you're working with a participant who has fully accessible needs. Now, I know we don't determine that, but after you've got familiar with the participant and the funding categories, let's say you know that they're in a wheelchair, they need some assistance, but they're not at the point of needing the ceiling hoists and the UPS, etc. And let's say that participant has requested to live alone in an apartment. This is the category. So apartment, 1 bedroom, 1 resident, and then you look across the top here, they're in the fully accessible category, and you know they are going to need on-site overnight assistance, and often that is available in apartment buildings. This is the base amount. It will then be multiplied by that location factor. So it might go up or down a little bit based on that. And it also then can be adjusted according to a sprinkler allowance. So the figure you look at will probably not be 69,302, but it'll be very close to that. And it's really important then to sort of, when you're talking with people, if let's say they've come back approved for a house to residence in that fully accessible with OOA, their funding is going to be around that 34,000 mark, give or take. Whereas if they actually wanted to live on their own in an apartment, the funding required is 69,000. So you can see what a big difference there is there. And it's not that, we're being tight or difficult in saying it won't work. It simply cannot work. We cannot house somebody on their own with not sharing in a one-bedroom apartment when they've got a completely different level of funding. So the one last thing I wanted to finish on was by showing you a video, because I'm figuring a lot of people may not have been through an SDA home before. So I'm going to share this with you and I'll talk you through it. So this is from a block of 10 apartments we've just completed in Oxley in Brisbane. Now, these are built to the high physical support design standard. We will be housing people in here who are fully accessible approved as well. So you can see the kitchen there has those extra features, the oven at the right height, space for knees to go under. We've got a little breakfast bar on the end as well. It's got really big open living spaces, an extra large bedroom, and obviously a bathroom that allows for the ceiling hoist system to go through, easy shower to get into and out of, automation of the doors. People often think that a one-bedroom apartment is going to be really small, and how could you survive in there with a largish automated wheelchair, electric wheelchair? But you can see here that the spaces are very generous. So don't be put off by thinking about using a one-bedroom apartment for high physical support. This is also a little, with a little bit of backyard space we had left, we put in an outdoor area so participants can use that when they're entertaining friends as well. So that's just to give you a bit of a quick look at what one looks like. I'll go back now to the slides and I'll hand over here to Hayley.
Hello, thank you, Sue. Okay, so now we understand the different categories. It's worth having a look at the eligibility criteria. So understanding whether your participant is likely to be eligible for SDA is very, very important. I mean, our role is around managing expectations. So it's important to know whether your participant is likely to be eligible before starting an application. Okay, so as Sue said before, it is only 6% of people on the NDIS that qualify for specialist disability accommodation. When looking at eligibility, it's extremely important to understand the SDA rules. So the SDA rules set out the legislation that the NDIS will follow when determining SDA, whether SDA is reasonable or necessary. Now, we do have a link at the end of the slides to the SDA rules. Oh, Richard's just put it up on the screen for us. He's amazing. Thank you, Richard. Okay, so what I have got on these slides are just snippets directly from the SDA rules. What we need to know as support coordinators, we need to know Section 12, Section 13, and Section 14 of the SDA rules. Okay, so when looking at eligibility, your customer or participant will either have extreme functional impairment and very high support needs. So when doing an argument for SDA, it is much better to nail one argument, so saying the person has extreme functional impairment, than to do a loose argument for both of those sections. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so what is extreme functional impairment? Okay, so NDIS looks at 3 key areas of functional capacity. So you only need to have one of these areas, but if you can argue to all 3, that's even better. So the first area is mobility. So when we're assessing mobility, we'll be looking at things like walking, climbing stairs, getting in and out of the bed, out of chairs, carrying or moving items around the house, or getting in and out of the house. When thinking of mobility, there's other factors outside of physical disabilities that may limit someone's mobility. I know as a support coordinator, when I started thinking about SDA, I really only ever thought of people with physical disabilities. And it wasn't until I did a lot more training around SDA that I realized that people with, say, psychosocial disabilities and cognitive disabilities also qualify for SDA. So someone with impaired psychosocial functioning might struggle with mobility because they might have fear of leaving the house. So that might be an argument that you can have where they have reduced mobility because of some of their anxieties associated with leaving the house. Self-care is another one. So self-care, when you think of self-care, you're thinking of things like personal care, such as washing, toileting, getting dressed. You'd also consider things like eating, drinking, talking, and taking medication. Again, it's important to consider that the person may physically be able to eat their food and might need any physical assistance in doing that, but their psychosocial or cognitive functioning may impair them, so they regularly forget to eat. Or it might be that they make poor meal choices, so they have reduced health outcomes. So these are the types of arguments that you've got to think about when you're looking at your customer. So do we have issues with self-care? Are they extremely reduced? Do they have extreme functional impairment in that section? Okay, so the last one is self-management. So when you think of self-management, it's the things that get you up and around and the way that you manage your life. So, you know, is the person currently living in squalor because they're not getting their housework done correctly? Do they need physical assistance with their housework, or do they need some prompting assistance with their housework? Can they follow routines? Can they make and maintain friendships? I think that's a really important one too, because we've often used that argument for people where, say, every accommodation setting they've ever lived in, that they've ended up having fights with their neighbours. So they've had to move to multiple different locations because of the relationships with the community around them within those. Also, safe relationships. I know, and probably for you guys as well, as a support coordinator, I had a lot of customers that have had financial abuse, sexual abuse, and weren't able to make decisions around and recognize unsafe relationships. So again, it's maintaining boundaries and managing behaviors. So customer might have extreme behaviors of concerns, all of those types of things. Okay, so your extreme functional impairment is always going to be measured against whether the assistive tech or equipment or home mods have already been put in place. So once they've had all those assessments done and they have all the assistive technology, or an OT has said the assistive technology is not actually going to change their extreme functional impairment, that's when you become SDA eligible. Okay, so if someone can go into the home and they only need minor modifications in their home and it's going to change their functional impairment, then SDA is not appropriate. It is only appropriate that if those modifications are not going to change their extreme functional impairment. All right, so that was Rule 12. So you can do Rule 12 or Rule 13. So extreme functional impairment or very high support needs. Again, you can argue both, but I would recommend you choose one and do it well, as opposed to doing a loose argument for both. Okie dokie. So for these guys, it generally is about having customers that have lived, I mean, there's a few different ways we can do it. So the first one, we look at where the customers have lived in arrangements that potentially would have been sort of institutionalized arrangements. So they might have already lived in a basic SDA. So anyone for a basic SDA, so that's if they were living in an SDA before 2016, they were all considered basic. In order to move into another SDA home, if they wanted to move out because that's no longer suitable, a lot of these homes weren't actually built to the SDA standards. So they're not appropriate. People are living them and they're not actually appropriate to their needs. If a customer wants to move out of basic and into, say, robust or a fully accessible, you'd need to redo an application. So in that circumstances, you might use this argument that they've been living in an SDA, but now we're redoing it. This argument would also be good for people that have been living in nursing homes. So you've got, for NDIS, a YIPRAC, so young people living in aged care, that is a really high priority for NDIS, getting people out of residential aged care. For a lot of people, they're highly likely to be eligible for SDA. So if you do have people in the aged care facilities that are under the age of 65, then it would be worth having a look at SDA. That goes the same for anyone maybe living in residential homes, residential housing, not residential, sorry, like boarding house settings. So it might be they living in residential care in, say, foster care arrangements and things like that. Okay, so if that's not an argument you can do, you could go towards that they need really, really high person-to-person support. So they might be on a 24-hour SIL. They might have large hours of one-to-one support. If you're going to do this argument, you really need to be going towards having a look at their informal support network as well. So if they have a really large group of informal supports around them that can supply a lot of support, I wouldn't be doing this argument. But if the person's been living at home for a long time, have really high support needs, their parents are aging and no longer can do that sort of level of support anymore, this could be a really good argument that you could go down in order to get SDA eligibility. And the last one is risk to the community. For this one, we often do this for people that are eligible for robust SDA. So if the participant is potentially a risk to others or risk to the community, how will SDA help that? So it could be that they need, we need the more sturdy build. It might be we need it noise proofed and things like that. All right, so remember we do one or the other. All right, next slide, here we go. Okay, so that was 12 and 13 of the SDA rules. Now this is section 14 of the SDA rules. Now I haven't copied and pasted it directly from the SDA rules because it was just going to be way too wordy for the screen. So what we've done is we've tried to reduce it down. So on top of proving that they are, say, have extreme functional impairment, you also need to show how SDA is going to better assist them. Okay, so the first one is their goals. So how does SDA help them meet their goals? So if we're looking at the goals, and I'll talk to this more in our next webinar, there's sneaky things you do as a support coordinator to set it all up so the application works towards the customer. So you set their goals so they're going to meet the SDA application. So it might be, their goal might be, I want to learn to cook. So how does the SDA help the person learn to cook? And as we saw in Sue's video, the kitchens, you can have better access to cooking in an SDA home. So you could say an SDA gives you better access to the kitchen so he can achieve his lifelong goal of learning how to cook. Okay, so you're always bringing it back. How does that SDA moving into that home assist the goal? The next one is where it'd be more beneficial where possible for, so we're talking about how it's going to improve their functionality. So how is SDA going to improve the functionality of the customer? So it might be, or alternatively, how will stop the reduction of their functionality? So someone might have a progressive disability. How will potentially having fully accessible and the reduction of stairs or the reduction of whatever, how will that help to maintain their level of functionality and stop it from deteriorating? Or how will it improve it moving forward? Okay, hold on. Let me just get on to my screen. All right, so let's have a look at someone with very high person-to-person supports. So what we are going to do in that case is we're always got to talk about how the SDA is going to reduce the cost somewhere else, okay? When we think about NDIS, we're always thinking about how can we prove that it is cost effective to the NDIS. So the NDIS isn't just going to approve something if it is going to cost them more money, okay? So if we're saying that person has an inappropriate bathroom, so we're needing 2 support workers every morning to assist them with self-care, we need to show once they have SDA that is no longer needed. So we no longer need 2 people to shower them, and therefore we can take, they might even be able to shower themselves once they're in a fully accessible or a high physical support unit, and we can reduce the cost in their SIL or the cost in their support package, whether it be ILO SIL or drop around core supports. So it is all about value for money. How is it going to represent value for money? And you actually need to break that down. And we'll talk about that more in the housing plan, how you break down the costs so you can show what is value for money. I better go through this quick because my time's getting wrapped up. Okay, and the last one is how can you show stability? So if a person, say they've got a psychosocial disability and they're moving from one place to another because they cannot maintain mainstream housing, how is SDA going to give them stability in their life? And it might be because they can stay in the one house because it's built robust, so they're no longer screaming down and getting kicked out, or they're not causing property damage, all of those types of things. Before I go, I just wanted to share with you quickly. Did I share? There we go. The Summer Foundation eligibility criteria. Now, this one is absolutely fantastic to do with customers when you're trying to determine whether they're eligible. So this would be step 1. You would sit down, and the great thing about it is it has little tick boxes. So you need to get some evidence for each one of these boxes. So when it says and, you need all of those. I think somewhere it says or. Yeah, or if it says or, you only need to use one of those boxes. But this is a great resource to use, and I strongly recommend you download it, get it on file, and then use it with your customers when you see these little things up here, or you got 12.1, 12B, that is the direct link to the SDA rules I was talking about. So you're proving 12.1, or you're proving 13.1, and so on. All right, I'll be quiet now. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Hayley. I know there's so much to go through, but remember, everyone, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to look more closely at eligibility, and we'll also look at the step-by-step process that Hayley would go through, and the agency, what works with the agency, what is the process with the agency, but what can work effectively for you as a support coordinator. So now, Hayley, I think you need to drop that slide so I can stop sharing. Yeah, there we go. All right, let's go. We're going to talk about this finding SDA accommodation a little bit further on. There's the resources, so I'm going to pop those, a couple of other ones that I haven't already shared. I'll pop that in there. All right, questions. So I'm aware of time. We do have one question. Well, there was 2 questions, almost related. So Amelia said, probably Sue, got funding approved, had 2 residents fully accessible. She was after an apartment, which she got a townhouse. There's no surprise there at the moment with decisions coming out of the agency. She was after an apartment to live independently on her own with her sister. Because she was funded 2 residents townhouse, can this be herself and her sister, or will this have to be 2 NDIS residents? Great question, and we can answer that. Sue, do you want to take that one? You're on mute.
Yep. I'm getting it. Okay, yeah, look, definitely that can be done. When the approval comes back as 2 residents, the NDIA are referring to 2 NDIS participants. So look, typically if you build from an SDA provider, if you build a 2-bedroom apartment, you will be expecting to house 2 participants. However, you definitely can do it with the 1 participant and a family member. And I can honestly say that just about everything that I've got on the go at the moment in terms of 3 projects in the design stage, they've all got family members living with them. So it definitely can be done. When there is a non-SDA person living with them, so it might be a family member, partner, it could just be a friend, that extra person does pay rent. And essentially they pay the equivalent of market rent for that area. And if there's 2 people there, they pay half. So if it would normally be $500 a week to rent that apartment, that extra person, the family friend person, would pay the half of that $250. Now, it very much comes down to the SDA provider because obviously there is a big difference in the income between an SDA participant and a non-SDA participant. So it really comes down to them making a decision. If you were designing, say, in the high physical or the fully accessible category, from the outset, you can design that 2nd bedroom just to be a standard bedroom, as in no ceilings, hoists, none of the extra things that are required for that design category. And that can improve the feasibility when you're working out all the costings. So the short answer is yes, you can definitely have a friend or family member live with you. You'll just have to talk to the SDA provider on a case-by-case basis.
All right, great. And that also answers the Chung's question as well, which I answered in the chat, but the market rental piece you explained in more detail. There's no more questions in the chat box. One question that we do get a lot is, can a participant bring their own supports to, say, one of our homes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably should have made that really clear at the beginning that we always aim for a complete separation of service. So BlueCHP, the Guide Your Home program, we do not do any support coordination. We don't have any support workers. We are purely an SDA housing provider. So we encourage people to bring their own supports with them, and we don't try and influence that in any way. As the SDA provider, we have to have a service agreement with the support provider who's working on site, because we've obviously got workplace health and safety obligations to them as well. But no, we do not choose your providers. We do not influence it. The only thing I have to say is that in some situations, just say it's a 3-bedroom house and you've got 3 participants moving in. And again, depends on people's care ratios. But if you've got a 1:2 or 1:3 ratio on the care side of things, it's very hard to have 3 participants all with 3 different support providers coming in. That means you'd have, every night when you just say they were cooking dinner, you'd have 3 different people cooking 3 different meals for 3 different clients. When it came to the general cleaning, maintenance of the house, the gardens, you got 3 separate people. That doesn't work so well. So there has to be some crossover there. So I've seen it work where people do have the same support provider in ongoing sense, but then they might have separate community access people. They'll have different drop-in services during the day. But, just the pure reality is that you have to have some coordination there of those services. And look, Hayley, you might want to add in something to that as well.
Yeah, I think it can be really confusing for us because often a SIL provider is partnered in with an SDA provider, which can really create some confusion for support coordinators, because when you often, as part of the process of looking for SDA, you start with a SIL provider. That people are going to SIL providers to say, hey, do you have vacancies? Oh, that's an SDA vacancy. So I think that, I know when I've often speak to support coordinators, understanding that they are 2 separate things and understanding they're separate applications, and you can have various different types of support sitting in an SDA. It's really important to understand that they aren't hand in hand. In some instances they are. Sometimes there is a house comes with a set provider, But there are many houses that you can find that will be separate from a support provider.
And I think the two things there is when an SDA provider builds a house with no client in mind, they build a house, they will then generally, they'll work with a SIL provider to fill that house. So it will go to that SIL provider. Whereas when it's a client-led process, say like Guide Your Home, like our process, we start with the client. They may already have their own supports, so their supports will be that SIL provider for that house. So it's the different process of the SDA providers which can drive a little bit of that behaviour. But when you're talking about choice and control, you don't want to say, here's an SDA house, you must use, it can happen, like Sue said, you must use this SIL provider. Not a lot of choice and control in that. So it happens, it's out there. Sometimes, like Sue said, it just has to be that way, depending on the share ratio. All right, no other questions there. I think I'll just throw one more in there and then we're done right on time. If a support coordinator thinks they may have a client eligible for SDA, probably you, Hayley, what is the first thing a support coordinator should do? And I'm going to say it's never too early to contact an SDA provider. Don't wait till the approval's done. But what do you think, Hayley?
I think they should come to our webinar next week in a fortnight's time, because it will step by step take you through the application process and working out eligibility all of those things.
Perfect ending. So there you go, Tuesday, the 29th of March. Register or tell your friends. Please pass it on if you can. We look forward to seeing you then. Just there's our details, or there's the details that I said I promised you for Guide Your Home. If you do want to speak to anyone, there's the region with the email, or just go to our website, guideyourhome.com.au. All right. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Hayley. Much appreciated. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.